Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. We begin in Winnipeg, where the trial of a self-confessed serial killer continues. There were family members of a woman whose DNA was found inside Jeremy Skibicki's apartment in court on Monday. Last week, we told you about the profiles found of 16 women inside Skibicki's apartment during the police investigation. This, of course, does not necessarily mean they were victims of a crime. The family of Andrea Cedarwell contacted APTN after seeing her name in a story we wrote. Andrea died back in December 2023, and her family was told it was a drug overdose. The family is aware that Skibicki was already in custody, but couldn't shake the eerie feeling that their loved one was inside his apartment. So they decided to make the 2-hour trip from Kenora to attend court, where they got to speak with Crown prosecutors during a break. Here's T.R. Wheatley with more.
Daughters of Andrea Cedarwell are taking a brief moment to themselves outside this Winnipeg courthouse. They had been inside, listening to the ongoing trial of Jeremy Skibicki, who has admitted to killing 4 Indigenous women.
Always willing.
Justin Cedarwell says his sister had a protective spirit.
As much as possible, she wore her heart on her sleeve, and she was always there for others.
His sister Andrea's DNA was found on a cup inside Skibicki's apartment back in 2022 after police searched his place. Up until now, Cedarwell didn't know much about what happened to his sister.
We were advised that she had an overdose, and she was found in a bathtub, and that she had a brain injury due to lack of oxygen.
It was a shock to see his sister's name in media reports, especially after reading that Skibicki killed his victims in his bathtub. That eerie similarity had him and his family make the 2-hour trip here. Inside the courthouse on a break, Crown prosecutors told the family that Andrea gave statements and cooperated with the investigation. Had she have still been alive, she would have been called as a material witness, and there is no evidence she knew any of the women killed.
That's a true testament to my sister. Even though she lived a hard lifestyle, she was always willing to go out and help others as much as possible.
For her twin daughters, Alexia and Lacey Cabistra, while they find some comfort in knowing their mom may have helped in this case, they want to take some time to process being inside the same courtroom as Skibicki.
A new feeling, and I wasn't really used to it. It's kind of like weird knowing that she's involved in something like this big. I don't know, it's a weird feeling. Definitely something a 15-year-old shouldn't go through.
The siblings, who are 15 now and being raised by their father, want people to remember their mom for the kind person she was. Before coming here, they spent time this weekend looking at their memories they have with their mom.
I saw videos of when me and Lexi were just babies, and mom just any mom would do, make us babies laugh and be happy.
The twins say coming here has helped them with some closure. They plan to now focus on becoming medical doctors when they grow up, hoping to make their mother proud. As for their uncle Justin, he says his focus now is Andrea's 2-year-old son.
He calls me dad, he calls my wife mom.
While seeing pieces of his sister every day and the 3 children she left behind. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
You can find much more on the ongoing trial on our website, aptnnews.ca. And if you're triggered by this report, supports are available 24/7 through the MMIWG 2S support line. That number is 1-844-413-6649. To the wildfire situation now, and the next 48 hours will be critical for crews battling wildfires in northern British Columbia. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings us an update.
The northeastern community of Fort Nelson is at the mercy of weather today as wildfires burn only 2.5 kilometers away from the western edge of town. The intense Parker Lake wildfire is now over 50 square kilometers. This, along with 2 other massive holdover fires nearby, have been prompting evacuation alerts and then orders. Around 4,700 residents have fled Fort Nelson and the nearby Fort Nelson First Nation, driving nearly 400 kilometers south to Fort St. John.
So we had already left Fort Nelson earlier in the day for a trip down to Grand Prairie just for the weekend. And when we got to Grand Prairie around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just as we were pulling into the city, we were getting alerts on our phones and seeing on Facebook that an evacuation notice was put in place, and then shortly after that the order was put in place. So it was a bit of a panic. We were debating whether or not we should have turn around and go back to Fort Nelson, through the night and grab what we can and come back south. But we decided to just stay in Grand Prairie and traveled to Fort St. John yesterday to be with more members of the community.
Ryan Dickey, along with the Doig River First Nation local drummers, organized this powerful drum prayer Sunday night.
I walked away feeling more hopeful, feeling stronger, which is really, that's the essence that we've been taught, and the power and the medicine that the drum provides, and being able to do that for our community in times like these is really important to us as young drummers from Fort Nelson.
Mayor Rob Fraser says fire crews and emergency workers have been preparing for a last stand if the fire advances into town. But he's pleased that most people have left the community.
We did really well here, and Friday night we were able to evacuate almost 3,500 people from Fort Nelson First Nation and from town proper, in about 6 hours. We were able to get the hospital folks out, we were able to get the seniors out and the elders out, without any injuries, and for the most part, fairly smooth. I understand there's long lineup.
In the latest update today, BC Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bowen Ma, says it's rare for an evacuation order of this magnitude this early in the season.
Fire, which started on May 10th, is now over 5,280 hectares and located 2.5 kilometers west of the town of Fort Nelson. The next 48 hours will be a challenging situation for the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, given forecasted ongoing westerly winds and extremely dry and volatile fuels in the area. We may begin to see volatile wildfire activity later this afternoon.
The area has been experiencing drought, but rain is forecast for Wednesday. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
With numerous fires in northeastern British Columbia, the provincial government held a press conference about the volatile situation. Tina House has more.
There are currently 137 fires burning across the province of BC, with some of those fires being listed as holdover fires, which burn deep in the ground. 14 of those are listed as out-of-control fires. The government held a press conference to warn the public to be safe while out in the forest.
Right now, especially as we enter into the May long weekend, we really need people to pay attention to the fire bans that are in their region, if there are any. And even if there are no fire bans in place, folks who are going out into the wilderness to go camping, we need people to pay extra care, pay extra attention and take extra care to ensure that their campfires are put out at the end as well.
That warning comes after it's been reported that the out-of-control Parker Lake wildfire burning just outside of Fort Nelson is human-caused.
We need people to be safe. We are facing some extraordinarily challenging circumstances up there in the north. The Emergency Operations Center as well as the Incident Command Center have both left the Fort Nelson area, although resources are still being deployed.
According to the BC Wildfire Service, an unseasonably dry winter and spring has caused one of the earliest starts to a fire season in history, and more funding is now available to communities to prevent fires.
There has been significant investments in the Community Resiliency Investment Program administered through the Union of BC Municipalities in partnership with First Nation Emergency Services Society and the provincial government, and communities can apply for grant funding to do risk reduction work in and around their communities.
If you see any smoke or fire in your area, you're asked to call 911 as soon as possible. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Meanwhile, in Manitoba, some communities near Flin Flon and the Paw have evacuated amidst two wildfires near the towns, which are roughly 7 hours northwest of Winnipeg. But as our reporter Sav Jones points out, it's not just locals who are fleeing the flames.
A wildfire in west central Manitoba has nearby residents fleeing for safety. Over the weekend, the wildfire came within 1 kilometer of the town of Cranberry Portage, about 7 hours northwest of Winnipeg. At 38 kilometers long and 12 kilometers wide, the wildfire forced the town and nearby cottage communities to evacuate.
It was growing 2 kilometers on the head, the front of the fire. On the flanks, it was growing over 1 kilometer an hour on the sides. In spots, it was burning against the wind, and it was still roaring along against the wind. So it's we haven't seen that, and it's a combination of the extreme drought conditions and the high winds.
The wildfire is located east of Flin Flon and covers more than 30,000 hectares of land. Simmons says the crews on the scene could be fighting it for as long as even a month from now.
There is a lot of infrastructure. There's logging operations occurring in that area. You got a railroad that goes in to take out to the ore out of Flin Flon, and then you got the communities of Cold Lake, Sheridan, and Puckatawagan that are serviced by the rail line to the north. So a lot of infrastructure along with the hydro. Hydro's off in Cranberry Portage. They're working to restore the hydro.
The entire community of Cranberry Portage began to leave the town Saturday night. 550 residents have been affected, including a couple hundred students from the town's high school, Frontier Collegiate.
We had somewhere around 200 to 250 students to evacuate, and I'm proud to say that we got them packed up and out of town within less than an hour.
Reg Clausen is the chief superintendent for Frontier School Division, who oversees Frontier Collegiate. He says the students come from around 25 different communities in northern Manitoba, mostly First Nations who don't have a high school or the vocational courses Frontier Collegiate offers. They are luckily all safe, and most have returned to their home communities.
We have to start thinking about how do we continue the education for our students now that they're back in their communities, and how do we look after our staff who can't be in their homes, because I think the majority of the population in Cranberry Portage works for Frontier School Division.
He says it's not the first time a school in his division, which covers most of northern Manitoba, has been evacuated due to wildfires. He says the division also helps aid other wildfire-affected communities by providing buses for transportation to safety.
That has been, as of late, fairly common occurrence given the number of forest fires that have taken place. And this year looks at this point like it's not going to be any different, but we do hope that the rains come and soak everything so that there's less of that.
Sav Jones, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Let's hope that rain out there right now is helping. First Nations business leaders have gathered in Winnipeg for a first-of-its-kind forum. Details on that after the break. Welcome back. First Nations leaders and business professionals have gathered in Winnipeg to discuss economic growth and opportunity. Sierra Bettens reports on the first ever First Nations Economic Forum.
Financial literacy, nation-to-nation trade, Indigenous-led policy reform. These are just a few of the many discussion points at today's First Nations Economic Forum. Here in Winnipeg, First Nations business professionals, leaders, and entrepreneurs from coast to coast are gathered to strategize and discuss economic opportunities. Harold Kalla, the executive chair of the First Nations Financial Management Board, said the conference was inspired by the economic growth driven by the First Nations Fiscal Management Act.
More and more First Nations became involved in seeing economic opportunity that was before them and began to pursue those kinds of options. What we started to see as a result of that is how we could benefit from sharing our experiences and how we might create a united voice to advance the ideas that we saw that could reduce the impediments and support economic development.
During the question period, many participants brought up the Nawe Udina redevelopment project in Winnipeg as a site of economic opportunity. In late April, construction commenced on the repatriated lands. Upon completion, it will become the largest urban reserve in the country. Guy Dumas, a longtime business leader and tribal economies advocate, comes from Matthias Colum Cree Nation. He traveled to the conference to network and learn how other communities are tackling economic development.
We have a lot of businesses and enterprises going on right now. There's still a whole lot of room to grow. And I came here to meet some people and talk to some people about what they're doing in their area, because I'm fascinated by all of this, and there's some brilliant people here.
During group discussions, Dumas brought up policy reform, questions of ownership, and procurement of digital assets as key considerations.
It's time for radical change, not just incremental change, but radical change that will create that critical mass that we need throughout Indigenous country to change our economy. Because I know we have the capacity, we have the skills, we have the know-how, we have everything that we need to create this economy that we desperately need to have.
On Tuesday, the conference wrapped up with more participant-led discussions about economic growth. While this marks the first forum, Kalla says it will be one of many to come. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Indigenous identity fraud is the focus of a two-day summit in Winnipeg this week and a new podcast. Details on both after the break. Welcome back. Métis, First Nations and Inuit leaders are gathered in Winnipeg today for what will be a two-day conference. It's called the Indigenous Identity Fraud Summit, and the gathering is to discuss, quote, rampant Indigenous identity theft. It's being co-hosted by the Manitoba Métis Federation and the Chiefs of Ontario. The gathering is being criticized by the Métis Nation of Ontario and Métis Nation Alberta. We'll bring you a full story on the summit on your APTN National News right here tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, a new podcast is looking at cases of Indigenous identity fraud. The 6-episode series looks at an academic, a Hell's Angel, lesser-known cases in Hollywood, and more. It's hosted by Robert Jago and Angel Ellis. I spoke with them on Monday. Robert, Angel, thanks so much for being with us. Robert, let's start with you. Can you tell us about the Pretendians podcast and why it was something that you wanted to do?
So with this podcast, it's hosted by Canadaland. We're sort of reconceptualizing this whole thing about Pretendians. A lot right now, it's like a dog chasing a car or something. People are just going after every story, no matter the impact. And we wanted to focus it on those stories that have been missed. We're looking at a lot more men as Pretendians, and we're looking at stuff with a bigger societal impact. Especially our second episode, I think that one is hugely important to Indian country, and will actually affect a lot of people if it could get enough attention and create some change.
Angel, who are some of the people that we'll be hearing about and hearing from?
Some of the stories in the series revolve around Guillaume Carl. Some of them are Hollywood celebrities. And then even the Oklahoma State governor is featured in the series. So there's some pretty interesting characters that we dive into, and we look at the different ways that they commit fraud against the Indigenous community. And we kind of focus on demonstrating that huge impact that they're having, with the deception that they're bringing forward. And so those are some of the bigger, more recognizable people I think you would hear from.
Robert, what are your hopes for this podcast? Like you say, episode 2, you think could really make some waves?
Yeah, I mean, with each episode, we're trying to demonstrate something important here. In the first episode, I'm hoping it could just, in the first episode, we're really hearing from a Pretendian. We're doing an interview with a really impactful Pretendian who is probably the biggest one you've never heard of. There's fraud charges, there's all sorts of other, there's a prison sentence coming up. From that one, I want to start the conversation about some of that fraud and seeing actual consequences when they do go over the line. I mean, we just saw that case in the Arctic, in the north there, where those people impersonated Inuit people, and nothing happened to them. I think they pled out. So I do want to start a conversation on a bunch of these different things. I mean, I would love, for the second one, I really would love to hear that in the floors of Parliament, because I think that there's been a black mark put on Native people because of these Pretendians, and that something that they're doing, and it's really hurting a lot of people. I mean, in that one, spoiler alert, but no, I can't do a spoiler alert. But in that one, we see someone actually physically assaulted at the end of that story. So it's I do want to get those conversations started because and not just amongst us, but also in the House of Commons, because these are issues which are solvable. They created them; they could fix them.
Now, Angel, it's going to air weekly starting May 14th. There's currently 6 episodes, but are you thinking that this is possibly an ongoing series?
I know that there's definitely enough content to carry the series for multiple seasons. If we just stick to the most impactful and the most harmful instances of Indigenous identity fraud, there's still enough content to carry it through, and enough that we could investigate to keep it going for quite a long time.
I guess just finally, maybe to you, Robert, here, what's been the reaction so far? People know this is coming, see some of the episodes that are going to be coming up. What have you been hearing?
I've got a lot of really positive feedback and a lot of shock, especially hearing that interview with that Pretendian. People were really surprised at how incredibly rude he is and incredibly disrespectful and even hateful he is towards actual Native people. So I think that really that insight into their mindset is going to be the biggest shocker right out of the gate.
Well, it looks to be a fascinating podcast. Appreciate you both coming on to speak about it.
Thank you very much.
And the first episode was launched this morning. A new episode of Face to Face debuts tonight, and our guest is longtime producer and filmmaker Lisa Meaches. Over the past 4 decades, Meaches has produced countless acclaimed films and television programs, including Ice Road Truckers, TP Tales, Taken, and more. But she says in the beginning she was mistaken as an extra and not a producer.
At the time, they couldn't believe an Indigenous person would be a producer at a budget at that level. And we were going to eat lunch at Craft Services. And the head of Craft Services was telling me to go outside and eat with the extras, where the extras that were playing the chiefs in the movie. And my co-producing partner was standing with me, and he says to the crafty, she's the boss. She's the lead producer on this movie. And he was so embarrassed, and I remember being that aha moment.
You can catch that episode tonight after the news. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this afternoon. We will have much more for you tonight on your 6 p.m. Eastern Time newscast. And be sure to tune in here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when you'll find out who the new host of this early newscast is. I think it'll be a familiar name for some of you. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'll see you back here at 6 p.m. Eastern.